Indoctrination, everyone's favorite argument against particularly young Christians, as you can see here. This is your average Reddit or X atheist that doesn't know what they're doing. They just get angry when somebody ever speaks. Most atheists are better than this. They also don't typically, you'll never hear this argument, or very rarely hear it against a Christian that is older, just because it doesn't particularly work that much due to the fact that someone who is older has apparently a much higher chance of actually converting to the faith later on in life instead of being a source of the source of their faith being their parents before them. Anyways, it's generally inconsistent. This is because, of course, just like how an older Christian might have some sort of radical conversion story later on in their life, you could also just have a 16-year-old who maybe was raised atheist, but due to connections with maybe just friends or, I don't know, maybe even the internet, and then they become a Christian. It just doesn't particularly work. However, what I think about indoctrination, I think the word is thrown around way too often, which is a problem. But it's also somewhat understandable because basically any word that could be used as a negative connotation is just blown out of proportion in our society today. Generally speaking, when it comes to indoctrination, I see it as something that is neutral, at least inherently neutral. Obviously, we're going to like or dislike it based off of the indoctrination occurring, whether that aligns with our values or not. So, but the thing that is true about indoctrination that you can't avoid is that it just is. It just is, as I wrote right here. It's not something that we can necessarily prevent. It just is. So what we have to do is we have to indoctrinate our own values. I don't like using the word as I really don't like using the word, to be honest. But the thing is, when it comes to parent-child relationships, you're going to want to indoctrinate your values to your child, because if not, then someone else is going to do it. It could be their friend's teacher. Right now, the big one is going to be the internet. I circled it. Very, very important. I think a lot of kids are being raised by the internet, and then, of course, who's going to end up being surprised when they have an ideology that's completely different from that of the parents when they just let their kids be on their phone the whole time. Though I'm not like exactly that strict when it comes to electronics. I'm not 100% sure what my future kids are going to end up doing with electronics. I do think my parents might have been a little overly strict. However, I also recognize that there's a lot of merit and benefit to being overly strict with things such as electronics. So, but that's a different conversation. So, if you are a good parent, I don't really want to judge parents here, but you want to raise your kids right, and that's going to include bringing in your values. This is just a good parent, so that there is the good parent. You're going to want to bring in your values into your kids. So, here's just an example of what you could maybe let them consider a free range parent that will say, I will let them choose their faith, or just let them choose in general. I've noticed that when it comes to I will let them choose their faith specifically, it only happens within Christianity. Other religions don't have this problem. It's only Christianity, Christian parents, that seem to at least even be okay with this particular view. Other cultures, for example, Islam's a lot more tied to tradition, a lot more tied to family. So, of course, they're going to be a lot stricter when it comes to how they raise their kids. It's much more difficult to get out of Islam than it is Christianity, for example, at least in the West. I don't know for sure. There might be some super strict like Christian, like cult like Christian sects that are like that. I don't know. But essentially, what you're saying with that is you're surrendering them to somebody else. And your child's just going to wander into somebody else. They probably, like, they're young. They might not be thinking correctly. They're not going to think, oh, this is someone I want to look up. They're going to look up to them because maybe their friends say, oh, this person's so cool, you want to be like them. Or they're just going to end up wandering into, like, maybe they just got recommended a random video on the internet of, I don't know, random atheist. Next thing you know, they're an atheist. Or they're gonna watch Andrew Tate and turn into some like red pill fake alpha male. It's fun. So, as a parent, you want to give them a reason to listen to you. You need to show why your way is better. Don't just say there is absolutely a wrong way to go about indoctrinating your kids. And you want to make sure that you're doing it appropriately and correctly, because if you don't, it could still very well be a problem, especially for their lives in the long run, if they're so stuck in a specific ideology when they are thrown out into the world and they're exposed to everything else, it might be a little bit overwhelming. It might cause confusion and it could cause some radical change very quickly. So you want to make sure that you do it appropriately. You give them a certain amount of freedom to pick their own faith. Obviously, eventually they will have to choose their own faith. You can't necessarily control everyone for their entire life unless you're in like a cult. So, but you want to make sure that you can do what you can so that they pick the decision that you like the most, that aligns most with your values. So here's just a little bit chart. I don't want to give parenting advice because I'm not a parent. I'm just doing this based off of the perception of my parents or my friends' parents, other parents all around, just kind of my general perception of here's what you should do. This is the involvement axis. This is how like present you are with your child. In other words, if you are like really high up of an involvement, your child's going to strongly correlate you with a role model. You're going to be a positive role model for that child. They're going to want to follow you. And the other one is just strictness. How strict are you? That one's a lot more straightforward as to what that actually entails. Now, in my opinion, this should be the target zone right here, in the blue circle. And the red X's are places you definitely want to avoid. You definitely don't want to be not involved at all. Obvious reasons. At that point, you're not even parenting. Should you even be a parent at that point? I don't know. And then I also think it's dangerous to have a little bit of involvement with no strictness. That's basically just going to be your free range parenting, your stereotypical internet free range parenting where they brag about it on Facebook or something. And then you have a little bit of involvement with a ton of strictness. In this particular sense, this I think could very easily lead to a lot of resentment towards you if you don't engage too much and explain this. It's going to, maybe you might hear the phrase because I said so a lot in this particular environment. Now, I think that phrase is appropriate in some instances. Maybe you can't explain something or you don't want to, but if you overuse it too much, then there's going to be problems. So this is the area I think you want to go. These ones are fine, sub-ideal, but you want to eventually end up here. Personally, that's what I'd recommend. So be careful. You got to recognize indoctrination just is something that is, so you might as well be the one that instills your own values instead of leaving it up for someone else to do.